Good afternoon and welcome to Mission Driven You. Thank you for tuning in today. This is a podcast where we focus on people who want to do well and who want to do good in the world. And today I'm super excited to be interviewing Traci Hill. Traci Hill provides the space for people to take back their emotional, mental, and physical health through subtle energy, alchemy, and helping them understand how to overcome emotional trauma and how to fully follow their passions and purpose. So I'm super excited to welcome you to the podcast today, Traci.
Thank you for having me, Will. It's great to be here.
Thank you. This is great. So I mentioned we always start with one question. So tell us, this podcast used to be called a revolution of interdependence, where we really focused on how we help each other succeed. Even though we rebranded what we're doing, we're still really interested in that question. So we always start with that first question. Tell us the story of somebody, some group, can be a person, could be a mentor, could be a group of people that really helped you get to where you are today.
So interesting. This is not what you'd expect as my answer. I was going through my diagnosis, which I'm sure I'll dive into, and I was searching for a way to help myself. And I was going to get dog food at this boarding/dog food store. Right. And this lady who worked there, as a young woman, happened to have the same diagnosis as me. I said, "Well, what are you taking?" She goes, "Nothing. I'm doing it naturally." I'm like,
right.
"Oh, I can do that too." I wouldn't have known. And so I don't know her name. I never saw her again, but
I love it.
A huge influence for me. I'm so glad I ran into you. This is great.
Isn't that amazing? Thank you for sharing that story. Yeah, I love asking people that question because oftentimes their eyes kind of light up and they think of somebody they hadn't thought of in a while. And I especially love that answer because we are surrounded by angels, people who want to speak into our lives. And when we let them, miraculous things can happen. So thank you for that answer. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So let's dive in because I want to start with your story because it's a pretty remarkable story. So you were diagnosed at 25 with MS. You're a very active person. Tell us, take us back to that time and tell us the experience of that diagnosis.
Sure. So just a slight backstory. I joined the military and I was going to college kind of intermittently, and I got deployed overseas. So I got a bunch of shots going overseas, was finishing up my master's degree. I had fractured my spine while in college as an athlete, but finishing up my master's degree in kinesiology, I was working with athletes all the time. I was teaching undergrad classes in exercise physiology. So I know the body really well. Right. And I was tripping and falling over nothing. Wow. And, a few months later, a few MRIs later, spinal tap later, they're like, yeah, you got multiple sclerosis. And I was like, well, what is that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember driving home because I was living in Chicago, my parents in the suburbs, and I'm telling them on the phone, and, my mom's really upset. And I'm like, I don't know what to be upset about because I don't even know what this is yet.
Right.
So, really, there is no diagnostic tool. So I will say it took about almost a year to fully say, yeah, this is what you have.
Wow.
And that's, par for the course back in 2000. So in the meantime, going through diagnosis, I got on the Chicago Fire Department. Because my symptoms were coming and going. I did go on a medication that was a shot every single day. Did not feel good doing that. Felt like I had the flu every day. And so I just took myself off. I ran into this lady at the dog food store. I can do.
Yeah.
And I like to tell people, listen, I'm stubborn.
Right.
And once I get something in my mind, that's it. So I was like, I'm doing this naturally. No one can tell me otherwise. So that's kind of how my adventure began, my journey, my deep dive down the rabbit holes that there are a plethora of, right?
Right.
And so I continued to expand my knowledge as much as possible. I mean, I went in every direction you could think of. I decided to, of course, expand on my nutrition knowledge even more. I mean, I had a good base going. So now I'm holistic, certified holistic nutrition coach. I went into trauma and stress and parasites and bacteria and candida and you name it.
Right.
I just kept like, expanding my black hole or my vortex of knowledge and just sucking up as much as I could. And in all of my understanding of this disease, particularly, or any autoimmune disease, it's so interesting because it's arthritis. It's all of these diseases that don't really have a reason that you get and don't have a cure.
Right.
They're always emotional. It always comes back down to emotions.
Yeah. That is interesting. And tell us more about, I actually happen to know somebody with MS, so I know a little bit about the answer to this question, but the fact that there's no official diagnosis, like why is that the case? And how can that be a thing if there's no diagnosis? Like, help us understand what you know about MS. I know you're not a medical doctor, but you're clearly an experienced person with it. So tell us more about the disease itself.
Sure. So for your listeners that don't know, it means you have lesions on your brain and your myelin sheath has kind of worn away.
Okay.
And again, yeah, you're right. I'm not a neurologist or a doctor, but because they literally don't know. I mean, they'll test you for Lyme disease, brain cancer, all kinds of other things. They do the MRIs. They probably do multiple, depending on your insurance. They will do the spinal tap to see if they're in your spinal fluid. And ultimately, it's the lesions on the brain that will say, yeah, it looks like you have MS. Wow. That's all they're going. Yeah. Or in your spine. And that's it, because there isn't like a blood test, or they can do like these neurology tests where your eyes track objects on the screen. But again, that could just be a neurological disorder.
Yeah.
And when I realized, like, okay, so there's no reason for the cause, they don't have a specific cause, a diagnostic tool, there's no cure, that tells me that they really don't know what it is. And if they know what it is, how can the medication be okay? Right.
Yeah. So in other words, we're giving medicine for something that they're not exactly sure what it is. And I'm a big fan of medicine. I'm not opposed to the medical establishment, but it is interesting that there's this significant illness, and it affects a large number of people in the United States. Then we don't really exactly, we have a tough time diagnosing it precisely. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So tell us more about, you mentioned there that it's largely having to do with emotions and kind of how you think. I know that there's a lot tied up in it, and even some of the related illnesses around inflammation and things like that. I know a lot of it has to do with not just what we do in our body, what's happening in our body, but often how we think about these things. So talk to us more about the idea of MS and the linkage to emotions.
Sure. So, like I said, the nerves are sheared, right? And when you hear these analogies in life, these sayings that we have for the physical body, it's in direct relation to the actual physical output. So like, my nerves are frayed. Well, guess what I was doing at the time? I was getting my master's degree, working full time, working out 8 hours a day. I don't suggest doing that ever. It was a lot of working out. So I was really stressed out. And I have a Facebook group for people with multiple sclerosis with over 22,000 people in it. Wow. And everyone will tell you, I'm stressed.
Yeah.
So you're at your wit's end, right? Your nerves are frayed. So that's literally what's happening. Your nerves get frayed. And so it's the ability to manage the stress. And this is how I came about all this. I started with a little bit of breath work, and that was working, and stripping away trapped emotions in my body, which I can get into if you like me to. But ultimately, it is people who are needing to be in control, however, don't typically voice their opinion. This is why it's mostly in females, typically don't voice their opinion, and are stressed out, try to do it all, try to be perfect, have a little bit of perfectionism. And so there's a lot of the same traits over and over.
Yeah, this sounds familiar. So All right. So you're in the pet store and you meet this person who has the same diagnosis, and they say, look, I was able to deal with this without going through the traditional medical route. You said, okay, I was supposed to hear that today, and I'm going to take that on as a challenge. What did you do then? Like, where did you go from there? Did you, how did you go about creating the process that helped you figure out how to deal with this chronic issue?
Okay, so this was overall about a 10-year process, but
Sure.
the initial thought was, that makes so much sense. Let me look up what causes inflammation. So it started with that. It went to environment, because they were testing me for, heavy metals, and I had mercury fillings. Like, people are like, could be anything, fluoride in the water, that it went to that. So I branched out kind of right away into environment, the things I'm intaking, not just food, but things I'm putting on my body. And, it just kind of scurried really quick, right? It was started like branching out.
Yeah.
And I sat on the internet for hours and hours a day looking, and another pivotal moment, not on so much, positive, yes, but it wasn't a nice thing to say, but I was on the MS Society website, and there's like was a blog. I'm sure there still is inside there. You can just chat with people, and someone was asking about, like, what do you do to feel better? And I said, I do yoga. It helps me feel better. And a nurse came on, such a specific moment. She came on and said, you can't say that. It's not proven. I was like,
right.
The devil worship or something? Like,
yeah.
Oh my God. So I was like, okay, I'm done with this website. I'm done with this very closed-minded way of looking at something that has no cure and no reason for the disease. Obviously, you're just spewing off what the doctors are telling you to spew off. So that was kind of another big turning point for me. Because I'm like, well, if I can't say yoga helps me, I'm in the wrong community.
It wasn't
even like I was a yoga teacher. I was just once in a while doing yoga. So, looking at my environment, especially, I found just so much research on the air quality, the soil quality, going into gut health. Gut health, of course, as we all know now, is huge. This is going back 20 years ago. When really no one talked about it, but gut health was like such a huge thing that while I understood what a good diet looked like, I had to shift into an autoimmune diet.
Okay.
Which, it wasn't a thing then, at least not well known. And so I had to make up my own thing. I had to rid myself of candida, which is, the bacteria that will fester and loves sugar. So and so from there, then it went into more of like, well, why am I susceptible to certain things, whereas people in my family, like my brother, isn't, or his results in a different way. Like he's got skin stuff, not quite psoriasis, but he gets skin inflammation. So what makes that different? And once I got into the emotion side of understanding diseases, then I realized, well, where are those coming from? And I realized, oh my God, the ancestral emotions are huge. Like, so what I think this is going to be very helpful for some of your listeners, because I think this is really important to hear if they haven't heard it before. But when you say you have something in your family, like let's say heart disease or cancer, it's actually not that, it's the emotion that gets handed. And it's really important to understand that, because when you can release the emotion, you release it from both sides of the line, and you don't have to succumb to that disease or illness anymore. Really important to understand that.
I can attest. I've been doing some of my own work lately on sort of understanding the things I was handed by ancestors. It's interesting. I had somebody on the podcast a few weeks ago, or I interviewed him a few weeks ago, and he made the interesting comment. He lives in New York, and he had seen this graffiti scrawled on the side of a building. It said, "You are your ancestors' wildest dreams." And so in some ways, there's this sense in which, we are living in a kind of world that even our grandparents, great grandparents might not have been able to imagine. And that's true, but it's also true. You're right that we're carrying forward all this emotional baggage that we got handed through family systems, probably through genetics in ways we're still trying to figure out exactly epigenetically and so on. So let's start there because I want to I want to really learn from your experience. Like, what did you do to really begin to strip away those emotions? And we'll talk about breath work. I want to talk more broadly about what you do with individuals. But let's start with that question of stripping away emotions and dealing with some of the baggage that you were handed, however you were handed it, whether it's genetically, epigenetically, family systems, and all that. What do you do, and how do you help people strip away those emotions?
So I do what's called emotional clearing. Mm-hmm. And as we go through from being in the womb, our own stuff. Okay. So from being in the womb all the way to this moment, anytime we have a situation which brings upon excess stress, so brings on anger, fear, frustration, guilt, shame, and we don't process it out, it decides to live in our body. And anger, for example, lives in the liver and gallbladder. Fear lives in the kidney and bladder. Sadness and sorrow, sadness lives in the heart. Mm-hmm. And the small intestine. So we have specific spots, but it also lies in the heart. So I used to use an onion as the example, but I like to use an artichoke because at the center of the artichoke is the heart, right? So as we strip away the outside leaves, like we think, oh, I'm going to get rid of this piece of anger and this piece of anger and this piece of frustration, but underneath are more of the same or some different.
Right.
And as we get closer and closer, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that, but you become more of who you really are. Your heart starts to get exposed and you start to shine from the heart rather than all these outside ego layers. So essentially those layers are just ego, and, we're ruled by that ego because, oh boy, we don't want to die of a social media blunder or getting cut off in our car,
Right. Yeah.
It's no more the proverbial tiger anymore, it's like traffic or social media or, something silly now, but we still feel the impact of that. Yeah. And so we use these, if we don't process them out by either crying or expressing them, they get lodged in our body. And every time we do that, we add on more layers of the same thing. We see the same cycles in our life over and over again. Always, for me, because I'll use my own examples because they're funny. I always get in the longest line at the grocery store. Always.
Right.
Even though I thought it was the shortest, it's like,
right.
So my one lesson was patience. I have to learn patience. I have to learn patience. I had to work on that one for a while. Oof.
Sure.
And once in a while, it still comes up like, okay, you're not completely absolved of it, but you're, when you notice it right away. And so I had to really work on that one in order to have more compassion for people. Like, not everyone's at my pace, I can't be at my pace. And then like, if someone's even faster than me or in more of a hurry, I'm like, oh, how rude, so like, well, just chill out. You got to figure out your patience. So that was many layers I had to remove to get back down into the core of who I really am. So I started about 15 years ago, removing my own trapped emotions. Yeah. I heard there were no podcasts back then.
Or not too many. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I don't even I heard it audio. I don't even know what I was listening on.
Right.
To be honest with you, it wasn't YouTube, but it was something.
Right.
And I heard a lecture about trapped emotions. So I'm like, well, let me just try it, And so I got the magnet and I didn't know if it was really working. And then after months of doing it on myself, not telling anybody, I was like starting to feel different and like, oh, wow. Like, okay, I didn't react like I normally would. My throat chakra was starting to open up. I didn't get bronchitis like I did every single year that had stopped. Wow. I was like, something's going on.
Yeah.
So I also got rid of a cat allergy, severe cat allergy that I have. There's a cat running around here somewhere. An egg allergy, like things were flipping for me. I was like, okay, I'm not sure what's happening, but cool,
Right.
And then I started to realize like, this is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody needs this. And then I started getting into my ancestral trapped emotions, and those were heavy and and so it just kept going and going. I started with like 800,000, which is where most people are. And I'm at zero.
What does that mean? You started with 800,000, what, emotions or what? Okay. Wow.
Emotions, so it could be like a lot like worry would come up, and then wishy-washy, and then more worry, and then worry again, then anger, then fear, then worry, So it's not just like, I can't get rid of all of my worry. It's the worry from like one very specific incident because I didn't process that incident. Okay. So now I have to get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the great
that's
thing,
powerful.
Yeah. And you don't need to know what they're from, which is awesome. Like, I don't have to go back and go, when was that from? Because that would be 800,000 incidences. I'd have to go
Yeah. Yeah. I love that model. And I love the analogy of an artichoke, by the way, Traci, because like an onion. So I'm a cook, I'm a chef, I'm a cook, I'm a good home chef. And frankly, there's not a huge difference in taste profile or goodness of the outside of the onion to the inside of the onion. They're all relatively the same in terms of taste and quality and all that. So peeling the onion back never made a ton of sense, because at the center of the onion, you have kind of what you started with on the outside. But the idea of an artichoke, I love that analogy, because that is, when you peel all the other things away, you get the heart, you get the most delicious part. So I love that analogy. That's good. Now, talk about trauma release, because that's something that you work with, I know, and you sort of work with in a more formal way, because for a lot of us, there's inherited emotional trauma, but then there's also emotional trauma that we picked up through family systems, through experience, maybe often through things that we felt that we couldn't control in our life, we felt happened to us. And so we carry this trauma forward. What does trauma release look like?
So, well, in my practice, the trauma releasing is different for everyone. I have to start with some emotional releasing to kind of peel away some of those layers because what happens is typically our trauma is from 5 to 7, as you know, from 5 to 7 years old is when we get most of our trauma. And that could be physical, sexual, emotional, spiritual, all of it. And it doesn't have to be extreme. Everyone's level of how they see the trauma is different. So, nearly getting hit by a car, that could be severe trauma to someone, whereas, a sexual trauma is on the same level as getting hit by a car by someone else. So it's not to mitigate anyone's level or sense of trauma. It's just to say that your trauma is going to be based on your experiences and your sensitivity to it. So between the ages of 5 and 7, as most people know, we get most of our trauma. And, whether that's divorce, death in a family, death of a pet, being ripped away from somebody, all kinds of things. And to help with that process, I do always go through the emotional clearing, because it helps peel away some of the layers. And then what we're finding is we see these cycles that people have in their life. So a cycle of people pleasing. I see that a lot in females, people pleasing. Yeah. Lots of people pleasing and no boundaries, right? So you're always saying, yes, I'll do that for you. And even though you don't want to, even though, or, and that there's no reciprocation, that you're not going to get anything in return, and you're just exhausted and you're wiped out. And that's a lot of times leads to cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, MS is one. So many different ailments can lead to that. And so when we can acknowledge the cycles, because most people don't even realize they're just in their own life doing the same cycles over and over again. So we have to bring up these cycles to see that, this is like, it keeps repeating over and over again. That's step one, is the acknowledgement, to actually see this is where you're at. And then 2, where it came from. A lot of times there's a very first incident someone will remember that it happened. And we go back into that. It's not pretty work. This is yucky work. And then we go in, and I have different techniques for like either changing the scenario or understanding it from a different viewpoint, because no one wakes up every day and says, I'm going to go hurt someone today. It's like everyone does every day. So typically traumas come from a mom or dad or caregiver. And it's not like your parents set out to ever really hurt you. They were doing the best they could. And so we have to sometimes see it from a different point of view, from a bird's eye view, and that helps absolve it. We make amends with it. So different steps within that, depending on the type and the severity of the trauma.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. So what are some of the, let's and I've done some of that energy work, and you're right. It's not pretty. It's yucky. It's hard work. It's not fun. And oftentimes you feel like you're trudging through the mud, but you come out on the other side after that liminal phase with a real sense of clearing and some beauty. Let's talk about some of the practical stuff, practical steps, because I know you talked about, I just want to start with breath work. So I'm a sold out fan of breath work. And now I want to give you some space to make everybody else listening the same level, to have them give them the same level of fandom. So like, first of all, how did breath work help you in dealing with your chronic illness? But then how do you use it on a daily basis, and how do you teach other people to be engaged in breath work?
So like the emotional clearing, there was something I was listening to, couldn't even tell you what it was, but talking about box breathing. And again, this is going back 20 years. This is before anyone knew what box breathing was.
Yep.
And I literally did that for 1 minute every single day. And I noticed within 3 days, I was feeling better. I'm like, something to this. Like the immediate effect was like, wow, there's something to this. Right. So it took me a while to kind of like dive deeper into more breath work. But now I am like a breath coach, and I love different breathing techniques, and I'm always learning more.
Right.
So with my clients, I will give them options because, breath work can be uncomfortable for some people. It will bring up emotions for some people. So depending on what we're using it for, I always tell people at the very minimum, you can do box breathing for 1 minute, because that's the research I remember hearing. That's all you need was 1 minute of box breathing. So I'm sure your listeners know, but it's 4 seconds breath in, hold for 4, 4 seconds out, hold for 4, and just repeat for a minute. Right. Super easy. Now, there's breath work for increasing nitric oxide in your breath. And there's a method called buteyko breathing, which is just a phenomenal breath work. You can find YouTube videos on that. There's the fire breathing, which helps bring clarity to the mind. There's alternating nostril breathing, Nadi Shodhana, which is beautiful for relaxation and syncing up the left and right hemispheres, which for me, because I'm very much left brain a lot, I like to sync my brain up more often. And so there's just so many different breathing techniques out there that I say, whatever works for you. I do a bunch of different ones with my clients, and I tell them, whichever one you're going to do that one. Yeah. Whatever works for you, do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you describe the work you do as energy alchemy. So I want you to kind of unpack that. I want to talk about energy, healing, how energy relates to this overall conversation.
All right. I'm glad you asked. So I am going back to school to get my doctorate in integrative medicine. And the beautiful thing is it's teaching everything with the backed up research. I'm like, oh, great. So it's quantum, we're learning quantum physics essentially for health. And when I work on the layers of your energetic body, so we have all these layers outside of our physical body, they are the ones that have quantum possibility, right? They haven't collapsed into our physical body yet. So right now, all around me are all the possibilities that exist. And my conscious mind will pull, based on many different things, right? Our experience, our knowledge, et cetera, will pull that possibility down and make it collapse it into a reality. And so we go from wave to particle. Okay, so I know it's a little quantum physics here, a little sciencey, but essentially, you think of like this cloud, right? We have this, you send your information up to the cloud. Well, the cloud holds all the information everywhere of everybody and everything. The cloud is all around you. Now you come a little closer to your body. It's your spiritual, energetic body that's holding information, and the possibility within this area around your physical body, it has the information. You just need to decide which one you're going to choose from. But without awareness, living unconsciously, you just go about with what you know and the habits that you have. So to change that, you have to realize that all possibilities exist, and you have to choose that possibility and bring that waveform of possibility, because it's like a wave, like a light wave, and bring it down and make it a particle, a cell within your body. So you're collapsing it into the physical body. And so, as what I call myself a subtle energy alchemist, is because it takes a while to change, but it's lasting change. It's impossible to change the physical body to affect the spiritual. It's the other way around only. And so if you want lasting change, you have to go to the energetic bodies first to let it collapse into the physical. That's the only way it will last forever. And so a lot of my clients, they have kids, have family, have jobs, and they don't want this major disruption like what I had, like this, I don't know who I am anymore, this existential crisis, right? And so I work subtly so that you can still, function in daily life and do your things, but you are going to change. And so it's a little more subtle. So it's kind of like a dual meaning we're working on your subtle bodies before the physical, but we're also working subtly so that you can function in everyday life.
Yeah, I love that approach. And so much of it is about consciousness. And I want to talk about levels of consciousness here in just a second. But I love that approach that you offer, because it helps people become aware. And so I want you to talk about levels of consciousness, but also just the idea of awareness. I mean, this is where it starts, isn't it? Like to your point, you had MS, you had this diagnosis of MS. So you had to become, like, you suddenly became aware. There was a crisis that you had to deal with. For me, I'm a person in long-term recovery. Like, a lot of the things you're talking about, energy and sort of understanding that other people are spiritually sick, these are things that you learn as part of the recovery process. But oftentimes it was the lessons we learned were dearly paid for. For you, it was MS. For me, it was recovery. For other people, it's certain big events. How can people become aware of these issues of energy and how they're affecting their life and how they can find healing if they don't want their life to blow up first? Like, what does everyday awareness look like, I guess?
Okay, so one thing I did, which is, it's so simple, and most of your listeners aren't going to do this because it's so simple. I would like, my kids would be taking a nap, so I'd have just a little free time to myself, 5 minutes. I would sit on the couch, no TV on, no radio on. We didn't really, cell phones weren't kind of a big thing then. And I would just sit on the couch and stare out in space, like, oh, and I'll just sit there for 5 minutes and just kind of become aware of, like, I'm sitting on the couch right now and doing nothing. And I'm okay with that. Just sitting here.
Right.
That's all good. So that's one very easy, free way. Always nature always is the answer to me. Go out barefoot in the grass, go hug a tree, go by water. I always say, go by water and see what lessons you can learn from water, because it is resilient. It can freeze, it can evaporate, it can go over rocks, it can make a new path. It's just an amazing source. And then, I guess on a more practical level is, I'll say, like, brain dumping in the morning. So it's like journaling. The very first thing you do before you even get up to pee, it doesn't have to be legible. You just start writing whatever, right? Because it helps free your mind space to have the agility to have more synapses fire throughout the day, and you're not so tired from it. That's always another one. Or just, stretching, becoming very conscious of your stretching, but then looking at your cycles, getting a little bit deeper, is looking into your cycles and seeing, like, okay, why am I always, finding a job that doesn't want to keep me, or I get fired from? What's that cycle? Or, why do I always get into this car accident, or whatever it is? You have these cycles. And so that's, a deeper layer. See how your choices and habits are affecting your daily life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what does it look like to become more conscious? Like, as you think about levels of consciousness, not that they're, it's not like you're measuring decibels or it's not a clear like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but what do levels of consciousness look like? How can we, I guess the question I'm interested in is how can individuals sort of know where they're at? What's a tool for understanding what my level of consciousness is at any given time?
Okay, so there are actually numbers, and I'm capable of testing for anybody. It takes 5 seconds to know. So the scale goes from 0 to 1,000 based on Dr. David Hawkins' work. Okay. And it's the scale of consciousness. So just to kind of give an idea, 200, anything under 200 is where a lot of people are right now, because it's very fear-based. There's guilt, shame, and fear under 200. And when we're in that, we don't have personal power. So if you feel like you don't have the voice to speak up, the ability to make your own choices, you're reliant on other people all the time, you're probably under 200 without getting it measured. Anything over 200, we're getting into anger, but anger can be proactive, right? You're just voicing yourself, probably just not in a nice way, but you're voicing your opinion. All right. So now as we move up the scale, 500 is love, unconditional love. There's 1% of the population is there. That's it. And so as we move up, like Mother Teresa was at 741, and you can just, you don't have to know your number, but whatever you see in other people, that's a mirror of yourself. And so if you're wondering where you're at, just look at how you view other people or who's in your life, the 6 closest people to you, you'll get a good idea of where you're at. And if you're good where you're at, or if you want to start moving up the scale, but there is a number, and it's, very possible to know, and you can move up and down that scale depending on the kind of work you do or don't do.
I love that. And I always think I'm asking informed questions. And then I guess no, this is actually, so I love that. And I love learning. I mean, I swear half the reason I interview interesting people is so I can learn as well. So that's really fascinating. I'm going to close us with one question that I've been asking lately, and I think it really it's just a nice segue from what we were just talking about in terms of levels of consciousness. So many of the guests that I get to interview on this podcast are really seeking to make the world more whole, more healed, just a better place. They really want to be those better ancestors, like we talked about earlier. And so I want you to answer, this is a little from left field, but I want you to think about this for just a moment. If you could look, say, 15 to 20 years down the line and imagine that, I don't know, some world leader is listening to this podcast and they suddenly key into the idea of really helping people raise their consciousness. And it becomes a global movement where people are like, we're going to raise our consciousness. I want you to look 15 to 20 years down the line and tell us what that world would look like.
I was actually just thinking this morning. So, it's out of left field, but not so much, right?
There you go.
We're going to ask this. So what's been on my mind for the last few months is how to live that way, and for everybody to live that way. And I think the answer comes in the form of like an ashram, which is kind of more of a new concept to me, but it's a community-based living. Yeah. Now, some people might be like, well, that's like a cult. No, it's not. It's not like culty, and it's not segregated. It is a community of, you can come and go, but we all have a gift we share, because that's what I teach my kids. Like, whatever your gift is, you have to share it with the world. And that's what you do. That's what you hone in on. You don't work on the things that you're not good at. You work on the things that you're great at, because that's what the world needs of you. That is your gift to society. And so if we all come together and share our gifts, we are never without. We are never without. We can have peace and joy. And it's like in my mind, I'm living in a space like this where we help each other build houses, and we grow our own food, and we raise our children together. And there's just this real strong sense of family, not just community, but family, that we are supporting each other in every realm. And, again, we're never without. We always have something supplied to us because we are growing with each other and not so segregated. Like I live in Chicago, but I never see my neighbors. There's cars everywhere, but I don't see people, it's like, it's sad. And we are community people. We're very communal people. You might not be like an outgoing extrovert. I'm not, but that doesn't mean you don't need support. We all need support, and I can't do everything and nobody can do everything. And to think that we can, I think that we're on that bandwagon for a while, like, especially for women, like, oh, you could be the mom and work and blah, blah, blah. We're exhausted. So I can't do everything, and I don't want to have to do everything. I need support here. I need support here, but I can offer this. And that's what I see.
I love that vision. I love that vision. What a beautiful way and beautiful picture to take us out on. So if somebody's listening, let's start first with somebody's listening and they are struggling with MS and trying to figure out how to find solutions, how to find support. First of all, how do they connect with you about that?
On Facebook, it's Healing Multiple Sclerosis Naturally. You have to answer some questions and get invited into the group. It's a very sacred group, I will say. So my community loves it because they keep it very sacred and holy in there. And then I'm personally Conscious Evolution Coach on Facebook.
There we go. Excellent. Great. Well, Traci Hill, this was such a generative conversation. I'm so excited to have had this conversation today and to share it out with folks. So thank you. Thank you for your gift of presence. Thank you for what you're putting into the world and making the world more whole. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate you.